Noah had always been a curious man. He'd grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the internet was his window to the world. For years, he had surfed the web like everyone else, reading about conspiracy theories, strange creatures, and obscure internet subcultures. But one late night, a random click led him down a rabbit hole that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It began innocently enough. He was scrolling through a forum dedicated to strange and eerie phenomena when he stumbled upon a thread titled, "The Dark Web, Where the Unseen Lives." His first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity tugged at him. The description was vague, promising to reveal things, hidden in plain sight and shrouded in secrecy. There was a link, and without thinking, he clicked it. The link led him to a website that was unlike anything he had ever seen. The interface was minimal, almost sterile, with only a few links. The first one was called The Archive of the Forgotten. As the page loaded, Noah's screen flickered, revealing hundreds of short videos. They were labeled with cryptic titles like Session 73 to 12, Return of the Whisperers, and Lost Time, Episode 19. The videos were grainy, like old VHS tapes, and each one felt like it was taken from a forgotten world. The descriptions were chilling. A family who disappeared in the mountains, leaving only their screams behind, and the footage of a man being followed by a shadow that isn't his. The details were disturbingly specific, but Noah felt compelled to watch. He clicked on the first video. The screen showed what appeared to be a small rural house. The camera moved shakily, as if someone was trying to hide from whatever was pursuing them. The viewer could hear the sound of breathing, heavy, panicked. Then, a voice. "No, no, they're coming. Please, they're coming." The sound of footsteps grew louder. The video ended abruptly. No conclusion, no explanation. Noah sat in stunned silence. He clicked on another, and another, unable to stop himself. Each video was worse than the last. Footage of people in extreme distress, abandoned places with disturbing noises, and cryptic messages that made no sense but felt deeply ominous. The most disturbing part was the feeling of being watched, as if the people in the videos were aware of the viewer's presence. But what was more unsettling than the content itself was the overwhelming sense that these videos weren't just stories. They were real, and someone or something was leaving these clues for people like Noah to find. The more Noah watched, the more the line between reality and fiction blurred. He found other hidden websites linked in the comments of these videos, sites that promised to reveal even darker truths. One such site was a simple black page with a single sentence. "Are you ready to see what you were never meant to?" Noah couldn't resist. He clicked. This site was different. No videos, no images, just text. The writing was cryptic, full of riddles and disjointed phrases. But as he read, the words seemed to speak to him in ways he couldn't explain. Messages like, "Your shadow is not your own," and "They are always watching you, Noah." A cold chill ran down his spine. Who was watching him? Then, a new page appeared. It was a live feed of his own room. He froze, heart racing. The camera angle was familiar. It was exactly as his webcam was positioned, showing his face as he stared in shock at the screen. "Is this real?" Noah whispered to himself. His hands shook as he tried to close the browser, but the page wouldn't close. He clicked frantically, but the feed stayed live, now showing a close-up of his eyes, wide with terror. The feed paused. A message appeared, "You're not alone. We never were." The next morning, Noah woke up with a pounding headache. The feeling of dread hadn't left him. He tried to go about his day, but every glance at his computer screen brought him back to that black website, to those cryptic messages. His apartment felt off. The silence was too heavy. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like it was someone or something waiting for him to slip up. Days passed and the sense of paranoia grew. Noah began hearing faint whispers in his apartment. Too quiet to pinpoint, but loud enough to send a chill down his spine. He kept seeing flickers of movement in the corner of his eye, But when he turned, nothing was there. He tried to talk to friends, but no one seemed to understand. The more he revealed, the more isolated he felt. And then one night, as he sat in his living room, staring at the screen, a new message appeared in his inbox. The door is open. Come closer. Noah knew he had to stop, but the pull was too strong. He clicked on the link. It led to another video. This one, however, was different. It was a live stream, but there was no footage. Just a black screen. A single line of text appeared. You're the final one. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the doorway of his apartment. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw its face. A grotesque, distorted version of his own. He stumbled backward in terror, knocking over his chair. The door to his apartment slammed shut, and the whispers grew louder. Something was in the room with him. He wasn't alone. The following morning, Noah's friends and family found his apartment empty. The only trace left behind was his computer, still on, the browser window open to the same cryptic page. But Noah was gone, vanished, without a trace. People speculated that he had lost his mind, succumbing to the allure of dark corners of the internet. His disappearance was chalked up to an obsession with conspiracy theories. But a few curious people, unable to resist the pull, found themselves wandering into the same rabbit holes that Noah had discovered. And each time they ventured deeper, they noticed something chilling. The video titles began to change. The archive of the forgotten grew. New videos were added, videos with names they recognized, faces they knew. The door that Noah had opened was still wide, and it was waiting for the next person to step through. There are some corners of the internet you can never escape. Once you've seen them, once you've crossed the threshold, you can't unsee the things you find. And the worst part is, there's always someone waiting, watching, waiting for the next curious soul to click the link. Will you be the next to fall into the rabbit hole? Story 2. One evening, when the world outside seemed just a little too quiet, David found himself scrolling through his usual late-night forum. It wasn't anything unusual. A mix of threads about conspiracy theories, obscure cryptids, and bizarre online mysteries. But tonight, something different caught his attention. A post titled simply "The Black Circle" sat at the top of the page. Its description was vague. If you value your sanity, do not click. But if you must, follow the path. Curiosity gnawed at David. He had seen strange things online before. Unexplainable videos, dark web riddles, unsettling audio clips. But he had never come across something like this. The post had no other replies, just the chilling warning and a link. He hesitated for a moment, but the thought of unexplored mysteries lured him in. He clicked. The screen blinked, and David found himself staring at a simple black circle in the middle of a pitch-black page. No text, no links, just the circle, pulsating softly as if it were alive. David's pulse quickened. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but he didn't move. He had an overwhelming feeling that something was waiting, watching. He glanced at the timestamp on the page. It was midnight. He should have gone to bed, but something made him stay. He stared at the circle. Then, without warning, the cursor moved on its own. Clicked. The screen flickered, and David found himself not staring at a web page anymore, but a live feed of an unfamiliar street. It was dark, eerily quiet, with no one in sight. The streetlights buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the empty road. A figure appeared at the far end, standing still in the shadows. The feed zoomed in on the figure as it began to walk, slowly moving toward the camera. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless void where its head should have been. David's heart raced. His hands trembled as he tried to close the window, but it wouldn't respond. Instead, the figure continued its slow march closer and closer. It wasn't just the unsettling lack of a face that terrified him. It was the feeling of being watched, the strange sensation that this thing knew him, that it was aware of his presence on the other side of the screen. Suddenly, the figure stopped. The camera zoomed in on its chest, and David's breath caught in his throat. There, scrawled in a language he couldn't recognize, was a message that he could understand with an unsettling clarity. "We are here." The screen went black. David sat frozen, his mind racing. What had just happened? Was that some sort of prank, a viral video? Or was this something worse? Shaking, David opened a new tab and searched for any information about the Black Circle. To his horror, nothing came up. No forum posts, no articles, no videos. There was only silence. It was as if the link he had clicked had erased its existence. He tried to shake the feeling off, but the unease wouldn't leave him. That night, as he lay in bed, he kept hearing noises, soft taps on the walls, the faintest scraping sound just outside his window. He told himself it was just the wind, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faceless figure walking closer and closer, its blank, dark presence lurking at the edge of his vision. The next morning, he found a strange message on his phone, sent from an unknown number. "We are closer than you think." David's hands shook as he dropped the phone on the bed. His mind raced. He had to be imagining things. He hadn't told anyone about what happened last night. How could they have known? The days that followed were a blur of growing paranoia. David began to notice shadows in the corners of his room, flickers of movement out of the corner of his eye. He would look, but nothing was ever there. At night, the taps on the walls grew louder, and the strange feeling of being watched intensified. Sometimes, when he passed mirrors, he swore he could see the faceless figure reflected behind him. Then, one night, as he sat in front of his computer, a new notification appeared. It was an email sent from no one he recognized. It was just a subject line, "You're next." He clicked it. The screen blinked and then revealed something that made his blood run cold. The same faceless figure from the live feed. But this time, it was standing right outside his window, staring directly at him. No eyes, no mouth, just darkness. And in the reflection of the glass, David could see something else. Himself standing in the shadows of his room, but in the reflection, his face was blank. Hollow. Empty. The figure outside began to move toward the window. Slowly. As the footsteps got closer, David's breath quickened, but he couldn't move. The figure stopped just inches from the glass, and David could feel its presence through the screen. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. David bolted up from his chair, his mind reeling. He tried to turn off his computer, but it wouldn't shut down. The screen was frozen, and in the reflection of the monitor, he saw something that made his heart stop. The faceless figure was standing directly behind him. David spun around, his hands trembling. The room was empty. There was nothing there. But when he looked back at the screen, the reflection of himself was gone. The figure was now standing in the place where he had been, staring back at him through the monitor. It was then that David understood. The Black Circle wasn't just a website, it was a gateway, and it had been waiting for him. As the figure reached out toward the screen, the last thing David saw before the world around him went dark was the hollow, featureless face staring into his soul. And then nothing. The next day, David's friends found his apartment completely empty, his computer still running. The last thing they saw was an eerie, pulsing black circle on the screen, just as it had appeared on that fateful night. The link was gone now, erased from the internet, but rumors of the Black Circle persisted. Those who searched for it, those who found the link, reported hearing strange whispers and seeing dark figures lurking in the corners of their rooms. Some say that once you click the link, there's no escape, that it will always find you, always watch you. And when it does, you'll be drawn into the circle just like the others. Story 3. Lena had always been fascinated by the internet's dark side. Late at night, while the world around her slept, she scrolled through forums and sites filled with urban legends, creepypastas, and unsolved mysteries. It was a habit she couldn't shake, a curiosity about things that didn't quite fit into the world she knew. But one night, she came across something that would change her life forever. The post was titled The Echo Chamber. You shouldn't have clicked this. The warning was brief, almost too casual. It'll find you. It always finds you. Lena paused. It wasn't the first time she'd come across cryptic messages, but something about the tone of this one felt different. She clicked the link anyway. The page that loaded was simple. Just a black background and a small white box in the center. Inside the box, a single question appeared. Do you hear it? Lena frowned. She hovered over the keyboard, trying to think of what to type. There was no context, no instruction, no other clues. She stared at the box, a growing unease settling in her chest. Finally, she typed, "What?" and hit enter. For a few moments, nothing happened. The screen stayed still. Then suddenly the question changed. Do you hear it now? A soft noise began to filter through her speakers. It was a faint, rhythmic thumping sound, like the beat of a heart, pulsing in time with her own. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but the longer she listened, the louder and clearer the thumping became. She felt it in her chest, a steady, growing pressure, like a drumbeat that seemed to sync with the very core of her being. Felt wrong. She quickly turned off her speakers, but the sound didn't stop. It was still there, pulsing through her, vibrating in the walls. Then the screen flickered, and another message appeared. You're listening now. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She tried to close the window, but the browser wouldn't respond. No matter how many times she clicked the X, it remained. The thumping continued, louder now, a stifling presence in the room. A new line of text appeared. You can't stop it. A sense of dread settled over Lena. She looked around her apartment, as though expecting to see something emerge from the shadows. The room seemed darker, the air thicker, as though the very atmosphere had changed. The thumping grew even louder, and she could feel it reverberating in her bones. The screen flickered again. This time there was no text. Instead, a video began to play. A shaky, black and white clip of a person standing in a small, dimly lit room. The figure was completely still, but the camera was focused on the wall behind them. Lena's stomach lurched as she recognized the place. It was her own apartment, the very room she was sitting in. The figure in the video seemed eerily familiar, but she couldn't place why. The video cut out abruptly, and the screen went black. A new message appeared. It's waiting for you. Lena's hands trembled as she closed the laptop with a sharp snap. The thumping, however, didn't stop. It had followed her. She could hear it from the walls, from the floor beneath her feet, even from the very air she breathed. Her heart pounded in her chest, racing in sync with the rhythmic sound, now growing louder by the second. Panic surged within her. She needed to leave, needed to get out of the apartment. But every time she moved, the sound followed her, louder and more oppressive. She tried calling a friend, but her phone screen was black. She tried the lights, but they flickered and buzzed, casting the room into deep, suffocating darkness. Then the thumping stopped. For a brief moment, everything was still. Lena slowly reached for her phone, fingers shaking. She tried to open the browser, tried to search for an answer, but before she could, a new notification popped up. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "You're never alone." She felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. The air in the room felt thick, pressing down on her, suffocating her. She looked toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching from outside, but the street was empty. Then the thumping started again, this time not from the walls, but from the floor. It was beneath her feet, growing louder and faster with each passing second. The room seemed to shake. The thumping was no longer just a sound. It was a force, a physical presence in the apartment that shook the very foundation. Lena stood up, panic rising in her chest, and looked around, searching for any sign of the source. There, in the corner of the room, something was moving. A dark figure, too fast to identify, moved like a shadow, growing larger as it crawled across the floor. Lena's breath hitched as the shadow reached up toward her, its form twisting unnaturally, stretching and distorting. She could hear the scraping sound of nails against the floorboards. She backed away, her eyes wide with terror, as the figure grew closer, its form becoming more defined. It had no face, just a smooth, black surface, like an empty void. She turned to run, but before she could take another step, the figure lunged forward, its dark presence engulfing her. The last thing she saw was the screen of her laptop, glowing eerily in the dim light, displaying a single message: "We are everywhere." The next morning, her friends came to check on her, but her apartment was empty. The door was unlocked, but there was no sign of struggle, no sign of anyone having left in a hurry. Her phone was lying on the table, but the screen was cracked, as though it had been smashed from the inside. The laptop was open, but the screen was completely black. And the walls? The thumping was still there, soft at first, but growing louder, like a heartbeat echoing in the apartment, as if something was still waiting for its next victim. Days later, people began to notice the thread that Lena had clicked on was back. The same cryptic warning, the same link. But this time, there was one more message, posted after the text. "You will listen too." And as others clicked, they began to hear it too. The thumping, that slow, rhythmic beat, growing louder and louder as it crawled into their minds, never to leave. Story 4. Alicia had always considered herself an explorer of the internet's darkest corners. The thrill of uncovering forbidden knowledge, the rush of finding something that wasn't meant to be found. It was an addiction. She had stumbled upon hidden forums, deep web curiosities, and unsolved mysteries, but nothing quite like this. One evening, while browsing an obscure message board filled with conspiracy theories, a thread caught her eye. "The portal you should never open." The title alone sent a shiver down her spine, but it was the post that followed that piqued her curiosity. "You're not meant to know about this, but you're reading this. That means it's too late. The portal is open for you. You've been chosen." Alicia clicked the link, half expecting some weird meme or creepy image. Instead, she was greeted by a black screen with a single line of text: "Welcome." Below that, a countdown timer began ticking down from 10 minutes. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. It seemed like a prank, a strange game someone had created. But the strange pull to continue, to see what would happen, kept her glued to the screen. As the countdown ticked on, the chat box below the message blinked with a new line of text. "Are you sure you want to see it? Once you begin, you can't turn back." She hesitated. The warning sounded almost too real, but Alicia's curiosity overwhelmed her. She typed, "Yes." The timer reached 0. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her screen flickered, the blackness of the monitor beginning to warp. A sound echoed from her speakers. A deep, guttural hum, like a growl just beneath the surface of the world. The blackness on the screen stretched and folded, like it was alive, like something was trying to push through. The room around her seemed to grow colder, the air thick and still. Alicia felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the growling noise intensified. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone, or something, to be standing behind her. But the room was empty. The screen began to shift, showing what looked like a series of quick flashes. Distorted faces, places she didn't recognize, images that didn't belong in the world. She saw a house, dimly lit, shadows moving within. Then the screen flashed to a highway at night, but something was off. The cars were moving backward, the headlights flickering like malfunctioning street lamps. She felt dizzy as the images cycled through faster, more chaotic. A sudden image froze on the screen. A mirror, shattered, the shards reflecting nothing. No reflection, just void. In the center of the mirror, she saw her own face. Only it wasn't her. The reflection was wrong, contorted, eyes wide and hollow. Alicia gasped and stumbled back, but the reflection on the screen didn't move. "You've opened the door," the text flashed across the screen. "And now you're part of it." Alicia's breath quickened as she reached for her mouse, desperate to close the tab. But the screen wouldn't respond. The message blinked again, the letters becoming more distorted, as if they were being pulled into some unseen void. The hum in her speakers turned into a low, continuous whine, vibrating through her chest. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed. It wasn't a video or an image anymore. It was a doorway, a pitch-black tunnel, stretching into an infinite void. And at the very edge of that darkness, something was moving. Alicia froze as the shape came closer, a shifting mass of shadow. It was humanoid but distorted, its limbs too long, its body too thin. And its face. There was no face, just a dark, swirling mass of nothingness. The longer she stared, the more it seemed to pull her in, like the tunnel was reaching out toward her. "It's already too late." The words appeared on the screen again, but this time they were different. They were in her own handwriting, like a message she had typed without remembering doing so. "You can't escape it." Suddenly, the screen went black. The hum stopped. The silence was deafening. Alicia sat frozen, eyes glued to the screen, expecting something, anything, to happen next. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier, like the very air around her had become thick, suffocating. Then, from the corner of the screen, the smallest ripple of light appeared. A flicker, almost imperceptible. It grew brighter, widening into a crack in the blackness. A whisper, faint at first, began to echo through the room. It was her name, Alicia. The voice was distant, hollow, as if it were coming from the space between dimensions. Her heart raced. She felt the presence of something. Someone. Watching her. Something in the room with her. Something that shouldn't exist. The whisper grew louder, closer. The crack in the screen widened, revealing a glimpse of a room. A room she knew all too well. It was her bedroom. But something was wrong. In the reflection of her room, she saw herself sitting at the computer. Only it wasn't her. The figure in the reflection had no eyes, just deep, empty sockets where her gaze should have been. "Look at me, Alicia." The figure began to crawl out of the screen, dragging itself toward her, inch by inch. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, and the whisper grew louder, louder, until it felt like the voice was inside her head. She felt her own body tense, frozen, unable to move. Alicia tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out from the screen, its hand, if you could even call it that, stretching, thin and long, with fingers that seemed to bend and twist, reaching for her, pulling the very air toward it. The last thing she saw before everything went black was its face. Her face, but twisted, its mouth stretching into a grotesque, silent scream. And then, there was nothing. The next day, Alicia's friends found her apartment empty. The laptop was still open, the screen black. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of Alicia. But the moment they approached the screen, they felt it. The cold air, the oppressive presence in the room. And, in the reflection of the monitor, they saw her. Her eyes, empty, hollow, staring back at them. The message on the screen had changed. You shouldn't have opened it. It was too late now. The portal had already claimed another. And somewhere in the dark corners of the internet, a new thread appeared. The portal is waiting. Will you click? Would you dare? Story 5. Liam had always been drawn to obscure corners of the internet, where the forbidden and strange were housed. Late-night browsing had been a hobby of his for years, and every now and then, he stumbled upon something unsettling, something he couldn't quite shake. But nothing prepared him for the discovery he made one fateful evening. He had been bouncing between dark forums and hidden threads, as usual, when a post with the title, "Do you hear the sound?" caught his eye. There was no description, just the title and a link. It seemed innocuous enough, a thread made by a user with a cryptic name, but something about it felt different. A kind of chill ran down his spine as he clicked the link. The page that loaded was almost entirely empty. There was a single sentence in the center of the screen. "You hear it? Don't you?" Liam frowned. He wasn't sure what the message meant. He felt nothing out of the ordinary, no sound, no odd sensation. He hesitated for a moment before typing. "What are you talking about?" The page flickered for a second, and then the words changed. "It's already too late." Before Liam could process the words, a soft, almost imperceptible hum began to emanate from his speakers. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the sound grew louder. It was low, a steady pulse that vibrated through the air, like the hum of machinery far below the surface of the earth. It felt like it was coming from all around him, but he couldn't pinpoint its source. The screen flickered again, and this time an image appeared. It was a simple picture, a black and white photo of a street at night, empty and eerily still. There was nothing particularly sinister about it, but as Liam stared at the photo, a strange unease crept over him. The longer he looked at it, the more the image seemed wrong. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The streetlights flickered in a way that made the whole scene feel distorted, as though the photo itself was glitching. Liam turned the volume down on his speakers, but the hum persisted, louder now, vibrating in his bones. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, as though the sound was beckoning something just out of sight. "You're listening now," the text on the screen read, flashing briefly before vanishing, leaving only the image of the street. He tried to close the page, but his mouse refused to move. The cursor was locked in place, hovering over the corner of the screen, unable to click. Panicked, he unplugged his laptop and reset it, but when it powered back on, the same page greeted him. The hum hadn't stopped. It had only grown more intense. "You're here," the page read, this time in blood-red letters, as though the words were bleeding into the screen. The image of the street had changed. Now, it showed the same street but with a figure standing in the distance, their silhouette barely visible against the dim streetlights. They were standing perfectly still, facing away from the camera, but Liam could feel them. Feel their presence like a weight in the air. "Do you hear it now?" The text flashed once more. Liam's heart pounded. The figure in the image wasn't moving, but he knew it was watching him. He could feel its gaze cold and heavy. The hum in his speakers turned into a deep, guttural growl, vibrating through his skull. His hands were clammy as he tried once again to close the tab, but the page remained. And then, just as he thought he couldn't take the noise anymore, it stopped. The room fell into an unnerving silence, but it wasn't a relief. The silence felt wrong, hollow, as though something had been taken away. The screen flickered, and the image of the street changed again. This time, the figure was closer, just a few steps away from the camera. Its back was still turned, but the air in the room grew thick, as if it were closing in on him. He could see the figure's shape more clearly now, its outline jagged and distorted. The streetlights flickered again, but the shadows in the image didn't seem to belong to the surroundings. They moved unnaturally, like they were reaching toward the figure. "It's waiting," the text appeared. Liam tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey. It felt as though the weight of the room had grown unbearable, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His vision swam, and the room seemed to warp around him. His breath quickened, chest tight. He couldn't look away from the screen, even though every part of him screamed to shut his eyes, to close the laptop, to run. "Do you see it now?" The text blinked, and the figure in the photo turned around. Liam gasped. The figure's face was a blur, an awful, shifting mass of darkness. It was like staring into a void, a space where features should have been, but there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just a deep, formless shadow that seemed to reach out to him. The hum returned, louder now, louder than ever before. It was no longer a hum. It was a roar, like 1,000 voices screaming at once, drowning out all sound. Liam's heart raced, panic flooding his veins. He reached for the laptop, trying to shut it down, but it was too late. The figure on the screen moved. It stepped out of the photo, as though the two-dimensional world of the screen had no power to hold it. It came closer, growing larger, the distorted mass of shadow moving toward him with unnatural speed. The hum grew louder, a cacophony of unearthly sound, and the air grew colder and colder until it felt like his very breath was freezing. "You've opened the door," the screen flashed one last time. Liam's hands were trembling, but it was too late to escape. The shadows reached out toward him, their tendrils curling around his body, pulling him toward the screen. His body went cold, his vision blurring, as he was dragged into the blackness of the monitor. And just like that, the laptop went black. The hum stopped. The screen went blank. The next day, his roommate found the laptop on the desk, the screen still dark. Liam was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no trace of him in the apartment. His phone was missing, his things left behind as if he had simply vanished. But when his roommate sat at the desk to try and figure out what had happened, he found a new post on the forum. "Do you hear the sound?" And below it, an image of a street at night, empty, except for the figure in the distance. The figure had no face, and it was looking straight at him,